Hey, Debbie, how's it going today?
Good.
Hope you're enjoying the conference so far.
I think it's been amazing, actually. Really good dialogue.
Thank you. Well, I'm just going to start off. You're global head of the innovation network, and then we hear about Citi having an innovation lab, and then there's Citi Ventures, right? So all these different entities affiliated to Citi, all kind of working in the blockchain, digital currency space. Maybe you could just give us kind of the lay of the land here. Who does what, and what are the projects being executed?
Sure. Happy to. Well, Citi Ventures is the organization that I'm part of at Citi. It's basically the innovation engine for the company. And we're focused on discovery and experimentation in and around areas that can help drive new customer value and growth for the firm. We have a number of activities or ways in which we do that, many of which you just mentioned. So we actively invest in startups. We announced our investment in Chain.com today, and Adam was on stage earlier. I was just chatting with him backstage. We mentor startups through our startup accelerator programs. We partner with other companies, and then we also fund a number of proofs of concept and pilots, do a lot of testing in our innovation labs. Mm-hmm. So the innovation network piece, which I run, is we have 8 innovation labs globally that cover different parts of our businesses. Mm-hmm. And we have an internal acceleration fund that allows us to basically fund proofs of concepts in areas, topical areas that we believe are of strategic relevance to us. So there's, it's not just blockchain, although that's one of them, but wearables is one of the areas that we're exploring. Biometric authentication, we're starting to look into Internet of Things. So that's basically the lay of the land. And we have a particular bias that having all of those things under one roof in Citi Ventures gives us a lot of leverage and synergies across the different activities.
Okay, so Citi Ventures is the umbrella kind of organization in which all these different entities then interact. How does that then connect to the bank as a whole, if that makes any sense?
It makes perfect sense. So basically, we're headquartered, by the way, in Silicon Valley, though we do have a team in New York, and we're a relatively small team inside 250,000 person organization. So actually, the way in which we connect with the business is really critical. So our connectivity through the labs is actually one of the ways that we do that. The labs actually don't work for Citi Ventures, but we manage, they work for the businesses, but we manage all the labs as a network by design for exactly that purpose, to help maintain the connectivity with the business. We also have rotational programs where we bring people in to work alongside us in Citi Ventures. We have some of them here today, and we call them catalysts, and they are helping make sure that the work that we're doing is being done on behalf of the areas where the business has needs.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So this leads me to kind of my next question. How did Citi get involved in the blockchain or cryptocurrency space? So there's a story a few weeks ago about Citi Coin coming out of the innovation labs. Maybe you could just tell us the story of how did this notion get kind of seeded within the bank?
Well, it might be worthwhile to point out that we're a 200-plus-year-old institution, and there's actually sort of a fun anecdote that I only learned about recently myself, which is that long before the internet was ever even in place, Citi had a pretty big initiative to develop an electronic cash system. It was actually piloted with the US government, which I think is fascinating. So that's not necessarily cryptographic currency. But I joined the bank 4.5, not quite 5 years ago, and we've been talking about digital money for the whole for the whole time that I've been there. More specific to Bitcoin, let's see. I can recall being in Tel Aviv, visiting our lab there in the second half of 2013, and it was a particularly, I think, high media moment for Bitcoin because of the volatility and the price, and some, news about people like companies like New Silk Roads and all that. Sure. So we were actively in discussion about it and starting to, talk about how should we be thinking about this? Should we be doing something in the labs? Mm-hmm. The very first project that we funded was actually in January of the following year, 2014. And that project, we learned a ton. That project happened to be done in our Dublin lab. And it really inspired us with a lot more questions that we needed to get answers to. But it inspired us to be much more proactive about developing a portfolio of activities in and around blockchain across the company. And not just through the labs, it certainly included the lab work, but also getting companies into our startup accelerator program, partnering to learn and have other people to kind of experiment with, as well as venture investing.
Gotcha. And can we go back to that January 2014 project? Can you elaborate on what that initial project was and what did you learn?
Yeah, well, actually, that first project was around state-backed digital currencies. So some of the earliest conversations that we were having, governments, some of the largest governments in the world are customers of ours on the institutional side of our business. And many, I think everybody in the world is actually trying to figure out how to think about, the implications of this technology, both I think Bitcoin as well as the underlying technologies. And so, being advisors to our customers, we're regularly in dialogue with them. Some governments are looking at whether they should take their fiat-backed currency to a digital form, and so that was the focus of the first project.
So Adam from Chain's comments about the U.S. dollar and a blockchain suddenly seem to be making a lot more sense. Let's talk about use cases. So you said your approach is a portfolio-based one, but do you have particular use cases that are kind of top of mind that you think might gain traction or users ahead of others?
Yeah, well, I was struggling to think. There's so many amazing, conversations so far in the conference, and that last panel I thought was really spectacular. We're looking at many of those same use cases that were mentioned: cross-border payments and interbank settlement, the clearing and settlement. Trade finance. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we're looking at. And state-backed digital currencies I just mentioned, there's benefits to be had in terms of mitigating fraud, while distributing, welfare and benefits to, a government's citizens. So I think all of that is interesting. I would never begin to speculate on, what's going to happen first. I think Bly's remarks on the last panel were really apropos. I think it's going to be incumbent on us to find that intersection of places where there's a really painful cost and inefficiency that must be fixed, and and evaluate whether blockchain type technologies are the right ones to help build it. But I will say, one of the things that I'm excited about is there was the conversation on the last panel about where's the innovation, where's this going to pick up first? Is it going to be in the core, or is it going to be kind of outside of the core? I mentioned that partnering is a really important, part of our approach to innovation. And one of the partnerships that we entered into earlier this year was with IDEO. Maybe not a name most of you might expect to, hear at this conference. One of the world's leading innovation, design, and strategy firms. We partnered with them earlier this year on the Bits and Blocks kind of pop-up incubator initiative. This was an 8-week incubator program that happened at the Harvard Innovation Lab in partnership with NASDAQ, Fidelity, Chain.com, and Intercorp. And we had 6 student teams amazing students from MIT, Harvard, RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, working on these different kind of imagining, like not constrained to financial services at all, but imagining other kinds of use cases that could leverage the blockchain. And we're beginning to think about where do we want to explore on that periphery. Some of the ideas that came out were really cool, like a marketplace to allow homeowners to sell fractional shares of equity in their home. There were interesting ideas around reputation and around identity. So I think all of that is interesting. I agree with the quiz. We don't know what the killer app is because we're in the very early innings of this technology.
Sure. I think it's like we're at 30% of the audience agrees with you. And talking about partnerships, so there's the blockchain working group, right, which was mentioned in Chain's press release about their funding. Is that something that Citi Ventures is involved in? Can you talk about that at all?
We were just talking about that backstage. I think it's getting kicked off in the not too distant future, and we would hope to participate for sure. I think Brad made the point on the last panel. This is essentially a network technology, and we believe in partnerships anyway, but there's only so much one can do by themselves with a network technology and learn anything interesting. It requires engaging with partners. And so we're happy to do that.
So within the kind of the portfolio approach that you're taking to this technology, would you say, what activity would you say is kind of most fruitful at the moment? Is it like accelerators? Is it like looking at pitches from startups? I don't know if you can walk us through that.
Sure. Well, pitches from startups, yes. We Citi Ventures, particularly the investing team, we meet literally with thousands of startups every year. And many of them this past year have been, blockchain-related companies. And we are strategic investors in that we really look to commercialize solutions with our portfolio companies as well. So that's a very important part of our activity. And again, we're super excited about, the investment in Chain. The accelerator programs are very important to us as well. This year, we have a partnership with Plug and Play, who's here. I can't see Scott, he was here earlier. We also run our own startup accelerator in Tel Aviv, co-located with our lab there. And we have engaged with and mentored, I think, over a dozen startups in the last year and a half or so through those activities. Each of those startups, relatively early stage companies, has really unique ideas about use cases and solutions, and we really benefit from sort of their thinking. So that's a super important part of what we do. And then again, the partnership activity with IDEO that I mentioned, and finally, through our labs, we have a handful of POCs that we've been running and building. We're actively, continuing to add new ones. I was, again, with Adam in backstage, hope we add some proofs of concept with him in the near future.
Sure. What's your thinking in terms of, we started out with a panel about openness and permission and permissionless ledgers. What's your thinking, what's Citi's thinking about that kind of debate that's raging on right now?
Well, one observation is that I think when you have these exciting new technology innovations that are very disruptive and have the potential to be very disruptive to established industries and business models, you always have these kind of religious debates. I think it's part of the process. I spent my whole career working at tech companies in the Valley, and so I kind of forgot there was a religious debate going on because they're always going on. But I agree with Bly's comments earlier that across the spectrum of open or public to permissioned or federated and private, I think these are all interesting technologies to explore. We are actively looking at all of them as well. And I think you have to match up what is the customer problem or problem you're trying to solve, the use case with the best technology to do the job. So I actually think it's important to be looking across all of those, and that's kind of how we're approaching it.
Mm-hmm. And you also kind of concur that we're likely to see traction from the periphery rather than ripping out the plumbing of some institution and replacing that with a blockchain.
Well, yeah. Before I came to Citi, I spent 7 years at Hewlett-Packard, and financial services customers were a big part of our business on the enterprise side. And I used to hear this phrase. I didn't really particularly work with that business, but you'd hear legacy infrastructure as a common phrase. And I had no idea how legacy meant until I got to Citi. And so I fully appreciate the comments of the prior panel, because it's, I cannot imagine somebody just ripping out, the current systems. I think the ability to run some of these new platforms in parallel is a way that we can accelerate maybe understanding how quickly we can transition some of the core systems. And I don't think it's an or. I think you'll see a lot of innovation on the periphery as well, because it'll be easier to start there.
But so talking about kind of legacy systems, right? So what has been the response, or what has been the, let's just say response to your conversations within the bank with folks who run back office technology, for example. Have you had those conversations, and what do they typically go like?
Yeah, I think it's been acknowledged in a couple of the conversations earlier today. There's been a pretty dramatic sea change in the general conversation over the course of the last year. And we also had a kind of a transition from the conversation about Bitcoin to actually the underlying distributed ledger technology. I think year and a half, 2 years ago, the conversation inside of our organization was, as you might expect, people were very dismissive, very skeptical, worried. I mean, it kind of runs the gamut. I also don't think anything about the technology was very well understood back then either. As we've progressed the dialogue to the distributed ledger technology and really understanding, kind of the huge potential benefits that might afford across a variety of different aspects of our businesses and functions, I don't think anybody can afford, to ignore it. I mean, that's why we're here, to be part of the conversation. So, we've had a couple of internal forums where we gather people to have this dialogue, and I would say, the people who there are a lot of people across the firm really building their knowledge in this space, and I think those people, have a very appropriate attitude about it, which is, wow, lots of potential benefits and lots of challenges that we need to think through, because it's early days and it's not going to happen overnight. But I think everybody agrees that it's something that we should be looking at, and I think the people who are really in there on the shop floor in the labs building things, I think we get excited when we see some of the potential benefits.
Sure. And the financial and kind of banking technology landscape well. Banks have really seemed to have caught on to this very quickly, right? So the last year and a half, things were very different. 12 months, 18 months on, everyone is kind of working away at this stuff. Is this different from other technologies that you've seen come on the scene? And if so, why? Why are banks so quick to kind of engage with this?
I don't know if I would agree that banks have been quick to engage, but we have definitely seen sort of this pretty big shift in the last year, 18 months. And I maybe have a slightly different perspective on this. I think large, mature, large companies and mature industries have a set of challenges that are not related to any particular technology. Costs become more important as businesses commoditize. You're optimizing for things. It's harder to grow. And meanwhile, the world is going faster. It's going faster because of some of these, new technology innovations like cloud computing and supercomputers in our pockets and all of that. And so, if the world's moving at, many times, a greater speed than you're able to move, that's a big disadvantage. So I think, in Silicon Valley, we've seen a number of corporates across industries, not just financial services, every major industry, kind of move into Silicon Valley to set up labs or venture investing arms or scouting outposts to kind of, I think as a response to the fact that the world's moving faster and it's harder to grow and you need to look for growth in new places. So, I think there's a general trend, specifically about blockchain, as we've been discussing. I think there's every reason for banks and other financial institutions to be looking at this. And it's early days, and there's lots of challenges that we need to really work our way through.
Sure. We're running low on time, but if you could kind of sum up, where do you think blockchain, distributed ledger, digital currencies, where do you think they will go in terms of their interaction with financial services institutions?
Personally, I'm very bullish. I think we see a huge amount of venture capital going into fintech generally, and one of the fastest growing segments inside of fintech is this cryptocurrency, blockchain related space. So there's huge potential there for them to disrupt, and I think those of us in the established companies recognize that, as well as all the other potential benefits for us to step in. So I do think it will happen over time. How much time, I don't know. I think if we were all to kind of think back and try to reflect and remember more than 20 years ago, before the, in the early days of the internet. I mean, could any of us really have predicted, pick your favorite ones, Facebook, eBay, Google, Netflix. I mean, there's so many amazing, technology or applications that have been created on the internet as the internet evolved. And I personally think that the blockchain, Bitcoin stack has that same potential to, it's hard to, that's why I agree with that survey earlier. It's really hard to imagine all the places this can go. We're starting with what we understand today, and we'll kind of keep pushing the boundaries on that. But I think, it's exciting days ahead.
Excellent. Well, you heard it here first. Very bullish on blockchain technology at Citi. Thank you very much, Debra.
Thank you.